Chapter 25-21. And on the bed beside her, Xianxia also woke up with a terrible expression. He actually fell asleep last night. Xianxia couldn't believe it himself. He had always hated being approached by others, let alone sleeping in the same room with others. He thought he would be sleepless last night. But inexplicably he fell asleep. He didn't even know when he fell asleep. Luo Shaoqi was just lying on the bed not far away from him. When did he start to be so unguarded towards people? Xianxia gritted his teeth, his expression very bad. But Luo Qingtong was completely unaware. She slept very well last night. After coming to the outer realm for so long, she slept the most deeply and soundly this time. At other times she maintained the habit of sleeping lightly. Only by Xianxia's side would she let herself relax. This was also one of the habits that the man had made her develop for so long. Except for Xianxia's side, Luo Qingtong couldn't completely relax anywhere else. In this world she was only willing to rely on Xianxia. In front of him she let down all her defenses and let him see her weakness and softness. No one else could. "Good morning, brother." Luo Qingtong yawned and greeted Xianxia with a smile. She had spent a lot of effort to suppress the two words Qian Ren, and she had almost revealed a flaw. Xianxia ignored her with a cold face. He only got up and washed up before walking out. Luo Qingtong didn't care. She had seen the man's sullen face many times. It was harmless. She wasn't afraid. She stretched lazily and got up to wash up. By the time she finished washing up and walked out, the noise outside was getting louder and louder. It was mixed with a woman's sharp voice. Luo Qingtong frowned and suddenly felt that the voice was a bit familiar. She walked out of the camp. At this time outside the camp of Luo Qingtong and the others, a group of people were arguing with Zhou Xian and the others. "Zhou Xian, don't go too far. I've already apologized to you. What more do you want? We're already in such a sorry state, yet you're still unwilling to accept us. Could it be that you want to watch us die in the abandoned continent? Don't forget that the clan has said that we can't leave them to die. If you do this, I won't let you off easily when I return to the family." Outside the campsite, Chu Yufei and the others were currently standing behind Zhou Xian and the others with disheveled expressions. Their current appearance could be said to be extremely miserable. Not only were Chu and Chu Yufei's gorgeous makeup smudged, but their clothes were also tattered. Even the mercenary groups behind them suffered heavy losses. This was especially true for Chu Yufei. The mercenary groups behind her, especially the high-ranking mercenary groups, had almost all of their members left. The middle-ranking mercenary groups had also suffered heavy losses. On the contrary, the low-ranking mercenary groups behind Chuka had most of their members left. At this time Chuka had her hands on her hips and was scolding Zhou Xian arrogantly. Luo Qingtong frowned and asked a mercenary next to her, "What's going on? Little seventh young master?" Seeing that it was Luo Qingtong, the mercenary who was questioned had a very respectful expression. He looked at Chuka opposite him and said with an angry and relieved expression, "It's all because of this woman." Chapter 25-22. It turned out that Chuka and the others were here to seek refuge with Zhou Xian. Coincidentally, Chuka and the others found Luo Qingtong's camp in the wee hours of the morning and ran over to ask Zhou Xian to take them in. At this moment both sides were arguing. Zhou Xian didn't want to take Chuka and the others in. What a joke. If it was someone from the Tianfeng Chu family it would make sense. But Chuka and the others, forget it. Chuka and the others had obviously just been attacked and were still in shock. Moreover, they had no one to rely on other than Zhou Xian. Who knew when they would find another disciple from the Tianfeng Chu family? Did they have a grudge against them? Moreover, with their current strength, they wouldn't be able to casually walk around the abandoned continent anymore. It would be strange if they were not eaten by those magical beasts and demonic plants. Therefore, even if Chuka was extremely unwilling, she was still pushed out by Chu Yufei to apologize to Zhou Xian and seek protection. However, her personality was arrogant and domineering. She had never put Zhou Xian in her eyes. Previously, because of Luo Qingtong, the third elder's line was targeted by the eighth elder's line. The wound on her face was still swollen. Therefore, her apology was insincere. Seeing that Zhou Xian was unwilling to accept them, she immediately made a big fuss. This was the voice that Luo Qingtong heard and woke her up. As the mercenary spoke, he said angrily, "Little seventh young master, you don't know. they wouldn't have fallen to such a state. It was Chu Ke who didn't listen to advice. Those mercenaries had already seen the danger and told her and Chu Yufei to leave quickly. But she didn't care and said it was nothing. In the end, she angered those magical beasts and demonic plants. In the end, the team was almost wiped out. She and Chu Yufei can run fast, but those mercenaries, you see. The mercenary's eyes turned red as he spoke. He was angry and glad. Fortunately, they followed Chu Xiaofeng and Luo Qingtong. Otherwise, who knew what would happen if he were to be with the other children of the Tianfeng Chu clan? If he was lucky, he might meet a good master and nothing would happen. But he also felt that it would not be as relaxed as now with Luo Qingtong and the others. If one was unlucky and met someone like Chu Ke, it would be a disaster. When the mercenary's voice rang out on the other side, Chu Ke and the other mercenaries saw Luo Qingtong and became even more excited. Little seventh young master, we are willing to follow you. Please tell young Master Feng to let us go with you. The mercenaries couldn't stand Chu Ke anymore. If they continued to hang out with him, they would be finished sooner or later. Chu Yufei was with Chu Ke, so they couldn't follow her. Everyone's voices rang out one after another, and Chu Ke was so angry that her mouth almost went crooked. He hated Luo Qingtong the most. If it wasn't for him, how could she have fallen to such a state? If it wasn't for the other party, they would have been snatched away by her to be her guards. Even those people with white jade masks were the same. Chu Ke looked at Yi Qianming and the others who were standing not far from Luo Qingtong. The latter and the others were tall and slender. In this abandoned continent, they didn't look like they were here to train as guards. Instead, they looked like they were here for a leisurely outing. Chapter 25-23. She didn't know if it was because of a woman's intuition. Chu Ke paid special attention to Yi Qianming and the others. Especially Yi Qianming, she was certain that the other party was very powerful. And Chu Yufei beside her was also the same. Looking at Yi Qianming, who was wearing a white jade mask, her heart was both happy and resentful. She was happy to meet the other party again. She was resentful because Chu Ke had put her in such a difficult situation and made a fool of herself. However, Chu Yufei was also very eager to stay. Unlike Chu Ke, who only saw Chu Xiaofeng and the others, Chu Yufei observed more carefully. She found that Chu Xiaofeng and the others were not only living well but also very well. They were proud of their success. Even Luo Xiaoqi, who was the weakest, had no injuries on her body, let alone the others. Although Chu Xiaofeng and the others were stronger. But in Mercenary City, the strength of the mercenary corps was almost the same. Why were they able to live so well while they were in such a difficult situation? Obviously there were masters among them. And they were very strong masters. Chu Yufei thought, and her eyes were fixed on Yi Qianming. This group of people with white jade masks had extraordinary temperaments. It must be because of them that Chu Xiaofeng and the others were safe. It was ridiculous that these mercenaries thought it was Luo Xiaoqi. Chu Yufei was jealous. She stared at Yi Qianming without blinking, thinking about how to use her charm to seduce the other party. Of course, all of this had to be done by letting them join Chu Xiaofeng's team first. Thinking of this, she suddenly pressed Chu Ke and said softly to Chu Xiaofeng, "Brother Xiaofeng, we are all of the same clan. Sister Ke, and you only had a small conflict before. Are you really going to watch us be helpless on the abandoned continent? What's more," as she spoke, she lowered her eyes slightly and a deep light flashed in her eyes. However, she still spoke with sincerity. "The entire Heavenly Wind Chu clan knows about the grudge between you and little sister Ke. If something really happens to us on the abandoned continent, even if you are not suspected, I think Brother Xiaofeng's life will not be very good, right? It will also be difficult for the 8th Elder's family to get away. And my mother and the Patriarch. If they target you, I'm afraid you and the 8th Elder's family won't be able to bear it." As soon as she said this, Luo Qingtong's eyes raised. This Chu Yufei's mind. It looked like they were asking Chu Xiaofeng to take them in, but in fact, there was a needle hidden in the silk floss, forcing Chu Xiaofeng to take them in. It was also a threat. Her words was much more than Chu Ke's. Chu Xiaofeng might not care of Chu Ke's words. But what Chu Yufei said, he would consider it seriously. After all, the things she pointed out were things that Chu Xiaofeng valued very much. That was indeed the case. The moment Chu Yufei said that, Chu Xiaofeng's heart trembled. Des family Moreover, there was also Chu Yufei. Thinking of Madame Xing behind her and her saving the Patriarch's life, Chu Xiaofeng frowned. He really didn't want to take Chu Ke and Chu Yufei in. But now Chu Yufei's words had reached such a point. He couldn't disagree. But what about Luo Shaoqi? Chu Xiaofeng looked at Luo Qingtong and was about to ask her opinion. Chapter 25-24. What you encountered earlier was an attack from the 1,000 silkworms? Luo Qingtong looked at the sorry state of Chu Ke and the others. She had only roughly glanced at the injuries on Chu Ke and the others and did not look at them in detail. Now that she saw some strange injuries on them, she immediately raised her eyebrows. It was fine for those who were lightly injured. But those who were seriously injured, Luo Qingtong looked at the marks on their bodies. They were clearly the marks of silk threads. And these marks were abnormally firm and flexible. The marks made by the silk threads were almost bone deep, as if they had been cut by a sharp knife. Looking at the small amount of mucus on their bodies, Luo Qingtong guessed that Chu Ke and the others had encountered a danger that was enough to wipe out the whole team. The moment she said this, Chu Ke and the others' gazes froze. Especially Chu Yufei, who looked at Luo Qingtong with vigilance and wariness. She did not know why, but after Luo Qingtong framed the third elder's family last time, she was somewhat afraid of this young man. Previously, if Luo Qingtong had not expressed her attitude, Chu Yufei would not have dared to negotiate with Chu Xiaofeng. She had already thought about it. If Luo Qingtong insisted on not letting Chu Ke join the team, then she would hypocritically persuade her and then helplessly join Chu Xiaofeng's team. In this way she could get rid of Chu Ke without any effort. In fact, if it were not for the fact that she wanted to maintain her gentle and generous character, Chu Yufei would not have cared about Chu Ke's life. After all, she could join Chu Xiaofeng's team alone. The one who had a grudge against the 8th elder's family was Chu Ke, not her. For the sake of the family head and her mother, Chu Xiaofeng would take her in. But she had to take into account their sisterhood, and could not abandon Chu Ke in front of everyone. If Luo Qingtong were to make things difficult for her, it would be exactly what she wanted. However, who would have thought that Luo Qingtong would ignore their request to join the team? Instead, she asked them if the attack they suffered came from the 1,000 silkworms. 1,000 silkworms? What was that? Chu Yufei's mind spun quickly. She realized that the magical beasts that attacked them were indeed spitting out threads as thin as thousands of strands. Those threads were extremely tough. They could not be cut by a blade or burned by fire. They were everywhere in the air, making it impossible for the naked eye to recognize them. That was why the mercenaries around her had suffered such heavy losses. In fact, this could have been avoided. The mercenaries around her had already told her that there might be danger ahead and asked her to stop Chu Ke's stubbornness. However, she didn't think much of it. There was a wide expanse in front of her, so what danger could there be? She smiled and agreed. She had no way of stopping Chu Ke, but in reality she didn't tell Chu Ke at all. Otherwise this wouldn't have happened. However, Chu Yufei would not let anyone know about this. She would only push the blame to Chu Ke and make everyone hate her. That would make her seem exceptionally innocent and magnanimous. Now that she heard Luo Qingtong ask about the 1,000 silkworms, her heart suddenly jumped. She looked at the young man, not knowing if she had seen through something. Why do you ask, 7th young master? The magical beasts that attacked us did indeed spit out threads. Chapter 25-25. Even if she denied it now, the mercenaries behind her would tell Luo Qingtong the truth. She might as well say it herself and see what Luo Qingtong wanted to do. Could it be that there was something mysterious about the 1,000 silkworms? It was said that Luo Xiaoqi's eyes were extremely sharp. But no matter how sharp she was, it was impossible for her to see the situation at that time from the injuries on these people, right? Besides, even if she saw it, so what? At that time she was just careless. The one who really caused the big trouble was Chu Ke. When the time came she would cry pitifully and repent. Could it be that others were not allowed to make mistakes? Chu Yufei thought about it and realized that even if Luo Qingtong pointed out the situation at that time, she would not be afraid of anything. Suddenly she was not so nervous. She looked at Luo Qingtong, wanting to see what she wanted to do. Luo Qingtong's gaze swept past her with a faint smile. This Chu Yufei was so good at scheming and was extraordinary. She didn't believe that she couldn't stop Chu Ke's stubbornness when she knew that she was in danger. The reason why this group of mercenaries ended up like this was not only because Chu Ke acted recklessly, but also because Chu Yufei tacitly allowed it. It was just that Chu Ke was the only one who took the blame. These two people, one was a white lotus and the other was a green tea bitch. They were brainless and did not even know that they were being played in circles. Luo Qingtong was happy to watch the show. Why did she have to point it out? What did it have to do with her? The reason why she asked about the 1,000 silkworms was that she remembered that the 1,000 silkworms were called meridian replenishing worms. The silk threads in their bodies were the most powerful killing weapon when spat out, but when collected they were the best meridian replenishing worms. If someone's meridians were broken and they became a cripple, they only needed to channel these silk threads into the other party's body and reconstruct their meridians. These silk threads could replace the real meridians and allow the other party to gather strength and exert strength that they could no longer exert. For example, the former Grand Supreme Dean was affected by the power of the divine beast flowing light in the land of the deceased immortals. His meridians were blocked and his strength plummeted. He had strength but could not use it. In fact, his strength was even regressing. However, with the 1,000 silkworms threads, even if Luo Qingtong's strength at that time was not enough to expel the power from his body, she could use these threads to rearrange the meridians in his body. This would allow his strength to flow through the meridians that she had set up and not have to pass through his original meridians to block the path. In this way, the Supreme Dean's strength would not be restricted. Even if Luo Qingtong could not heal his injuries, his strength would not be affected in the slightest. However, this was not the only benefit of the 1,000 silkworms. It was said that once the 1,000 silkworms gathered into a group, the insect king's body would produce an insect treasure. This insect treasure had the ability to regenerate indefinitely. To put it simply, the silk threads of the 1,000 silkworms were consumables. Once it exceeded the limit of what it could withstand, it might break and a new one would have to be replaced. However, the threads in this insect treasure could be regenerated after being broken. The 1,000 filaments worm was an unremarkable existence in the outer realm. Although their function was special, no one paid special attention to them. After all, for things like reconnecting broken meridians, other than Luo Qingtong, who had a pair of bloody eyes that could see through the human body and accurately fit every meridian without the slightest error, there was no one else. Chapter 25-26. Translations. Therefore, no one paid much attention to the 1,000 filaments worm, even though it was known as the meridian replenishing worm. Not to mention that they were extremely rare and hard to find. Therefore, Chu Yufei and the others were stunned when they heard Luo Qingtong mention the 1,000 filaments worm. They did not know what it was. On the contrary, Bei Qing and Feng Yu's eyes lit up. 1,000 filaments worm, meridian replenishing worm. They had wanted to find the meridian replenishing worm so that Luo Qingtong could replenish Yi Qianxian's meridians. In this way, Yi Qianxian would be able to use his new meridians to exert his strength. Although his strength would still be limited, in this way even if his meridians were to be broken he would not hurt himself. This was a great protection for Yi Qianxian's meridians. In this way his lifespan might be extended and increased to a certain extent. Luo Qingtong also had the same idea. She did not care how long the people with the heavenly meridian's body had lived, but her man must live a long life. No one could snatch him away from her. These 1,000 filaments worms came at the right time. Take us to the place where you encountered those magical beasts and I will let you join the team. Luo Qingtong did not waste any time and directly said to Chu Yufei and the others. Before the latter could speak, Chu Ke's sharp voice sounded. Who do you think you are? How dare you make decisions? Chu Xiaofeng, are these the mercenaries in your team? Overstepping your master's authority and making decisions without permission? You're really good at enduring. Chu Ke looked at Luo Qingtong angrily. The person she hated the most was definitely not Chu Xiaofeng but Luo Qingtong. This Luo Xiaoqi had caused the people of the Third Elder's team to be so miserable. This was especially true for her, who had directly fallen from her status as a proud daughter of heaven. Chu Ke looked at Luo Qingtong with extreme hatred. Luo Qingtong did not even bother to look at her. Did she need to pay attention to a brainless woman? When Chu Ke's voice sounded, Chu Xiaofeng's unhappy voice sounded. Chu Ke, if you don't want to die then shut your mouth. What's wrong with her? She's the one who can make the decision. Who do you think you are? How dare you order the people in my team? If you dare to say another word then you will die. During this period of time, Chu Xiaofeng had observed Luo Qingtong's behavior and treated her like a god of wealth. Everyone in this team Chu Xiaofeng. In the end, Chu Ke was blind and wanted others to be blind with her. Luo Qingtong's a thing. Xia mentioned she herself a lot, Chu Xiaofeng's a lot more. As a attention to mention to attention to luo to chu to team. Now that Luo Qingtong had spoken, Chu Ke came out to court death. If she wanted to die, he would fulfill her wish. Chu Xiaofeng's eyes were mocking and cold. Chu Ke was stung by his words and almost went crazy. She was the third miss of the Tianfeng Chu family. Although she was no longer a direct descendant, she was not someone a small mercenary from Tianfeng City could compare to. Chu Xiaofeng actually mocked her for such a b*tch. You. She screamed and was about to rush forward, but Chu Yufei held her back. Chu Yufei really wanted to strangle Chu Ke to death. Chapter 25-27. Chu Xiaofeng didn't want to accept them into the team. She tried her best to persuade him, but he finally showed signs of wavering. Now Luo Shaoqi also said that they could enter. But now she was courting death. If he were to lose this only chance, could it be that he would have to fend for himself with her in this abandoned continent? Idiot. He was really stupid. He was just a teenager. He had some prestige among the mercenaries in Tianfeng Mercenary City with his little ability. After they entered the team, they could deal with him however they wanted. Why did she have to make trouble at this juncture? Chu Yufei was furious, but she couldn't ignore Chu Ke. Otherwise, how could she act as a gentle, generous, kind and innocent girl? She had no choice but to clench her teeth and persuade Chu Ke. However, a murderous aura flashed through his heart one after another. If she had known that Chu Ke was such a burden, she would have killed her on the way so that she wouldn't drag her down. What an idiot. After she finished scolding and comforting Chu Ke, she looked at Luo Qingtong and said with a smile, "Young Master Shaoqi, I'm sorry. Sister Ke is used to being arrogant since she was young. Naturally, she makes mistakes easily. She didn't mean it. Please don't be calculative with her. I'll take you to the place where the 1,000 silkworms are. Please take us with you." The mercenaries behind her couldn't wait. Even if they insisted on not saying where the 1,000 silkworms were, these mercenaries would rush to say it. At that time they would be harmed. Without Luo Shaoqi's promise, they would definitely not be able to enter the team after offending her. At that time, who would care about their lives? Only an idiot like Chu Ke would offend Luo Shaoqi at this time. Therefore, when Chu Yufei spoke, she didn't mention any conditions. Not only that, but she also told them all the methods of the 1,000 silkworms. Through the eyes of the mercenaries behind her, Luo Qingtong knew that she wasn't lying. Interesting. This Chu Yufei was really smart. But smart women were the easiest to be fooled by their cleverness. She'd better not use her cleverness on herself. Otherwise, Luo Qingtong wouldn't mind tearing her face apart in front of others. Anyway, she was best at slapping people in the face. After receiving the information from Chu Yufei, Luo Qingtong turned to Chu Xiaofeng and said, "Young Master Feng, do me a favor. I want those 1,000 silkworms. They belong to me. If those 1,000 silkworms are guarding the spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs, how about they belong to you?" According to Chu Yufei and the others' descriptions, the 1,000 silkworms they encountered were a large group of over 100. Usually, the 1,000 silkworms would appear alone or in small groups. For such a large group with more than 100 of them, the spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs they were guarding must be very precious or in large quantities. Under such circumstances, Chu Xiaofeng naturally agreed readily. The other mercenary groups also had no objections. Even the mercenaries behind Chu Ke and Chu Yufei were promised rewards by Luo Qingtong. The 1,000 silkworms were too rare. In contrast, she didn't care about those spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs. Moreover, if the 1,000 silkworms gathered in a group and gave birth to a kingworm, there might already be a bug treasure in the kingworm's stomach. She was very happy at the thought of being able to forge meridians for Xianxia that wouldn't break. Chapter 25-28. While Luo Qingtong and Chu Xiaofeng were talking, Bei Qing Fengyu and the others glanced at their master and came up. They coughed softly and said, "Young Master Shaoqi." They followed the way the mercenaries addressed Luo Shaoqi. Firstly, it showed their closeness. Secondly, it was because the other party was similar to Luo Qingtong, so they unconsciously addressed him respectfully. They felt that this young man named Luo Shaoqi was not an ordinary person. Ahem. Fengyu said, "Young Master Shaoqi, I wonder if you can give us some of the 1,000 silkworms?" They were discussing with Luo Qingtong, but they were very embarrassed. Because they also knew that it was a bit difficult. After all, Luo Qingtong was the one who wanted these 1,000 silkworms first. It was really wishful thinking for them to want other people's things just by saying hello. In fact, if the person who wanted the 1,000 silkworms was not Luo Qingtong, they would not be so easy to talk to. With their strength they could just snatch the 1,000 silkworms when they wanted them. Anyway, these things did not belong to Luo Qingtong yet, so they would rely on their own abilities. But in this way they would have a falling out with Luo Qingtong. If it were someone else they would have a falling out. They would just leave the team directly. But this person was Luo Shaoqi. They thought that the other party gave them a similar feeling to the evil doctor, and then they thought of their master's special treatment and indulgence of the other party. They always felt that there was an inexplicable attitude of loving the house and its crow. If they hurt Luo Shaoqi because of this, not to mention others, even their master would be furious. At that time they would all be in trouble. Therefore they had no choice but to discuss with Luo Qingtong. They did not dare to have the slightest idea of snatching the 1,000 silkworms. And Luo Qingtong naturally knew what they were thinking. Looking at the man beside her who was looking straight ahead, but his body was very tense and waiting for her answer, Luo Qingtong smiled and nodded, of course. Anyway, this thing was for him. Luo Qingtong was not surprised by Bei Qing and Feng Yu's actions. In fact, if Yi Qianxian wasn't willing to make a move on her, they could have taken her by force. This man, no matter what the situation was unwilling to hurt her. Even if the 1,000 silkworms threads were extremely important to him. When Yi Qianxian heard Luo Qingtong's reply, he heaved a sigh of relief. If he could, he naturally didn't want to hurt him. However, the 1,000 silkworms threads were extremely important to him. That woman had always wanted to heal his meridians. If she could see these things she would definitely be very happy. Moreover, his meridians were fine, which made her less worried. More importantly, he would have fewer misgivings when he attacked in the future. He would no longer need to calculate his strength before attacking. The slightest excess would result in the collapse of his meridians. Didn't those people in Tiandu rely on this to unscrupulously search for his whereabouts? Otherwise, according to his previous strength, would these people dare to appear in front of him? No matter how many came, he would be killed. He could overturn the whole Tiandu. How could he allow them to control his own life? Thinking of the good idea of the Emperor of Tiandu, Yi Qianxian snorted coldly, and his eyes reflected a cold light. Chapter 25-29. In the past he was too lazy to care about them, but that didn't mean that his attitude was still the same now. If those people dared to stop him from being with that woman, then they should be prepared to suffer his wrath. Yi Qianming's eyes flashed with a bloody light. Deep, bloodthirsty and dark. Luo Qingtong and the others were ready to set off. The place where Chu Ke and the others were attacked was not far from here. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to find Chu Xiaofeng and the others with their current strength. Of course, this was also due to the fact that Chu Xiaofeng and the others were too crazy yesterday and killed too many magical beasts and demon plants. Otherwise, Chu Ke and the others might not have been able to find their camp alive. They might have been swallowed by magical beasts and demon plants halfway. Luo Qingtong and the others followed them to the place where the 1,000 silkworms were. It was a huge call with many lush trees and grass growing inside. In the middle of this huge call there was a flat open space. It was right in the middle of the call and was surrounded by trees all around. It's there. Chu Yufei saw the open space and her face turned pale. She pitifully approached Yi Qianming and the others and then said weakly, "We were attacked when we were walking. A group of 1,000 silkworms surrounded us and we couldn't escape even if we wanted to. If it weren't for..." When she said this, her eyes were already filled with tears and her body was on the verge of collapsing. However, before she could lean on Yi Qianming, the latter had already taken a step forward and appeared beside Luo Qingtong. "Did you see anything?" Yi Qianming's voice was deep and there was anger and impatience hidden in it. However, this anger wasn't directed at Luo Qingtong, but at Chu Yufei who wanted to fall on him. Did she think that she could hide from him with her little tricks? If it weren't for the fact that this wasn't the right time to teach her a lesson, Yi Qianming would have already flung her away with his sleeves. Was he someone that anyone could fall on him just because they wanted to? Wasn't she afraid of dying without a burial place? Yi Qianming's protective power was extremely strong. Someone like Chu Yufei was easily killed by it. It was really said that the ignorant were fearless. Luo Qingtong couldn't help but laugh when she heard the anger in his voice. She glanced at Chu Yufei. Before the latter could even fall, the target had already escaped. As for Bei Qing, Feng Yu and the others, it was as if they had discussed this beforehand. They all took a step back, completely distancing themselves from Chu Yufei. They didn't want to bring a burden with them when they made their move later. These 1,000 silkworms were of great significance to Master. Their importance might be even higher than the sky luo grass. They could not afford to lose them. They had to keep an eye on the surroundings to prevent any 1,000 silkworms from escaping. How could they have the time to deal with Chu Yufei? The latter originally wanted to stay in Yi Qianming's arms and let him protect her. That way she wouldn't be in danger. She could even get close to him and use her charm to confuse him. Who would have thought that Yi Qianming would run away without even looking at her? As for Bei Qing, Feng Yu and the others, they avoided her like she was a snake or scorpion. Chu Yufei gritted her teeth. Her body swayed and she stood still with a pitiful look on her face. It was as if it was an illusion that she was about to fall. Her acting skills were really not bad. Luo Qingtong almost laughed out loud. But soon her attention was attracted by Yi Qianming's movement in front of her. He was too close. Luo Qingtong stared at the face of the man who appeared in front of her. Chapter 25:30. He suddenly approached Luo Qingtong. The tips of their noses were almost touching, and their lips seemed to be inches away from each other. Luo Qingtong could feel his breath lingering around his nose. What was going on? This person wasn't the type to show his emotions. Luo Qingtong frowned. She remembered Yi Qianxian's temperament. He wouldn't be so close to her. What did he see? Luo Qingtong raised her hand to touch her face. Xiao Tuanzi had helped her change her appearance from her previous life. The birthmark on her face couldn't be more real. He shouldn't be able to see anything wrong with it. Luo Qingtong just thought of this. Suddenly she seemed to think of something. Her eyes suddenly opened and she quickly stepped back. She remembered. Even with the birthmark on her face, it was still her appearance from her previous life. And those appearances were exactly the same as her current appearance. Damn it. Luo Qingtong remembered that every time she went out, she would deliberately outline the birthmark and dye it almost covered her entire face. She had deliberately enlarged the birthmark in those outlines and blurs. In this way, no one would pay special attention to her appearance under the half-truth. This was also to prepare for her return to the true Spill continent in the future. After all, if someone found out her identity and suspected that she was related to Xie, they wouldn't be able to find out that she was Luo Qingtong. As a result, she slept in the same tent as Yi Qianxian last night. She woke up in a hurry today and forgot to deepen and widen the birthmark on her face. In other words, the small part of her face without the birthmark was completely exposed to Yi Qianxian at such a close distance. He didn't discover something, did he? Yi Qianxian did feel that Luo Qingtong's face was a little strange. With his eyesight, he knew that the birthmark that covered Luo Qingtong's face had been purposely deepened. But he didn't care too much. Because Luo Qingtong's birthmark was real. But now, seeing the small part of Luo Qingtong's face that wasn't covered by the birthmark, his heart suddenly moved. Why did this small part of her face give him a very familiar feeling? Luo Qingtong's huge birthmark was too confusing. Even if Luo Qingtong didn't deliberately deepen and widen it, it almost covered most of Luo Qingtong's face. With such a huge birthmark covering it, even if Yi Qianxian vaguely felt that Luo Qingtong's face was a little familiar, he couldn't match it with Luo Qingtong's face for a while. But at this moment he saw Luo Qingtong's figure quickly retreat. He subconsciously grabbed her chin and shrouded her with his breath and strength, fixing her on the spot. He raised his hand and touched the birthmark on Luo Qingtong's face. The birthmark felt real and bumpy. It was definitely not fake. But where did this increasingly familiar feeling come from? Yi Qianxian touched the birthmark on Luo Qingtong's face inch by inch. Following the shape of the birthmark in his heart, he slowly reconstructed the appearance of Luo Qingtong's face without the birthmark. Chapter 25:31. At that time, not only would she be exposed, but Yi Qianming and the others would also be implicated. Luo Qingtong thought of this and suddenly became anxious. Swish. She put her arms around Yi Qianming's neck and looked up at Yi Qianming with a smile. Hey brother, what do you see in me? To be honest brother, you always pay so much attention to me. Be careful that I accidentally fall in love with you. Luo Qingtong didn't retreat but moved forward. She took advantage of Yi Qianming's action of grabbing her chin to get closer to him. The two figures were very close to each other, not to mention that Yi Qianming was carefully looking at Luo Qingtong's face at this moment. The two were even closer to each other. Luo Qingtong suddenly leaned forward and almost got close to Yi Qianming's lips in an instant. Subconsciously, Yi Qianming threw her to the side. Swish. Luo Qingtong staggered back a few steps and then stared at Yi Qianming. Hey, it's just a joke. Brother, do you have to be so angry? When she spoke, Yi Qianming looked at her coldly and didn't say anything. Instead, he turned around and walked to Beijing Fengyu and the others. Damn, I was scared to death. Seeing that Yi Qianming didn't discover her identity, Luo Qingtong patted her chest and her heart. God knew that her heart almost jumped to her throat just now. Fortunately, she was quick-witted. Otherwise, her identity would have been exposed just now. Luo Qingtong rejoiced in her heart. Yi Qianming, who returned to Beijing and Fengyu's side, had a gloomy look in his eyes. Was it his illusion? At that moment, the appearance of Luo Qingtong seemed to appear in his mind. They were two different people. One was a man and the other was a woman. What's more, there was a birthmark on her face. That birthmark couldn't be faked and her identity as a man couldn't be faked. Why did he keep mistaking her for Luo Qingtong? But at that moment, what flashed through his mind was Luo Qingtong's face, which seemed to overlap with the hideous face of Luo Xiaoqi. There was also the familiar feeling that he couldn't ignore day after day. Was it really possible for a person to have the same habits and feelings as another person? Yi Qianming's eyes darkened. He raised his hand and called Fengyu over. Prepare something for me when you go back, no matter what method you use. As he spoke, he told Fengyu what he wanted. As the latter listened, his eyes widened further and further. Moss. Young master. Is what you said true? Fengyu's mouth was wide open. He had no idea why his master wanted him to find that thing. What's wrong with master? Why would he suddenly make such an outrageous request? Because of Luo Xiaoqi? He subconsciously looked in the direction of Luo Qingtong but was stopped by Yi Qianming. You don't have to look at her. Just go and prepare. Fengyu responded subconsciously and then went back to where he was. After he went back, he began to cry in his heart. It was really because of Luo Xiaoqi. Master, you can't. Don't. Even if the evil doctor isn't here, you can't fall in love with a man. I understand the principle of loving the house and its crow. But master, aren't we going a bit too far? I'm afraid that the evil doctor will go crazy when he finds out. Do you still want a wife? Chapter 25-32. Oh my God. Fengyu bit his handkerchief crazily. He suddenly remembered that when Yi Qianming and Luo Qingtong met and fell in love with each other, the evil doctor had always been a woman dressed as a man. Because of this, they mistakenly thought that their master was gay. Now it seemed that it wasn't a mistake. Was it really broken? It was just that their master didn't notice it before and thought that he also liked the evil doctor who dressed as a woman. Now that he met Luo Xiaoqi, the difference became obvious. Fengyu's mind was in a mess, but his face remained calm and composed, looking very reliable. In fact, his inner thoughts had already flooded the screen. Just when he couldn't bear this blow, there was movement in the valley below. Swish, swish, swish. A slight sound came from the dense forest. A group of people appeared in front of Luo Qingtong and the others. It's the sixth elder's people. Looking at the sixth elder's people, Chu Xiaofeng frowned slightly. They also took a fancy to the place where the 1,000 silkworms were. Several Tianfeng Chu family members gathered together at the moment. They looked at the open space in front of them and said to a mercenary, "Here? You mean the place where Chu Ke and the others were attacked?" Yes. These mercenaries were separated from Chu Ke and the others when they were escaping. In a panic, they ran in another direction, and met with a few disciples of the Chu clan from the Sixth Elder's faction. They told them about the danger they were in and the group immediately rushed over. However, they didn't come to save Chu Ke and the others. They came to get the spiritual herbs here. Brother Ming, there is a group of magical beasts here. There must be a lot of spiritual herbs inside. Otherwise, the spiritual herbs here are very precious. How about this? We can get the spiritual herbs here together. If there is a lot, we can share it equally. If there is a small amount, we can exchange it for resources. Whoever takes it will exchange it with resources of equal value. How about it? A Tianfeng Chu family member said. The Tianfeng Chu family member called Brother Ming was the strongest among the Tianfeng Chu family members. His strength was close to that of a core disciple. So when he heard this, he immediately nodded with a proud expression. On the other hand, the mercenaries beside him were looking around worriedly. Young masters, I'm afraid this place is not simple. Let's leave as soon as possible. The group of mercenaries had been on many missions and were very sensitive to danger. The sense of danger in their hearts told them that this was not the territory of ordinary magical beasts. If they weren't careful, they might be completely annihilated. Everyone came here to make a fortune and didn't want to lose their lives for nothing. However, just like Chu Kura, the disciples of the Heavenly Wind Chu clan didn't care at all. When they were on their way here, they didn't see any traces of magical beasts. Not to mention that Chu Kura and the other mercenaries who had fled were not that strong. How could they believe their words? The mercenaries they brought with them were all extremely powerful. Under such circumstances, dealing with a group of magical beasts that weren't very powerful was no problem at all. These mercenaries had groundless fears and were cowardly. A few of the Chu clan's disciples from the Heavenly Wind Chu clan were filled with disdain. Especially Brother Ming, who said coldly, "Don't say any more. Your mission is to protect us. Come with us now." Chapter 25:33. As he spoke, his expression was full of disdain. The reason why these mercenaries were so serious was because they wanted to get more rewards. Since that was the case, he would satisfy them and save them the trouble of chattering and not putting in any effort. Young Master Ming. The mercenary leader who spoke looked at the contemptuous smile on Chu Tianming's face and the expressions of the disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family beside him. He felt very embarrassed. It was obvious that these disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family treated their words as bargaining chips to get more rewards. He was furious. At this moment, a mercenary beside him said, "Forget it, leader. They won't listen to us anyway. We just have to be more careful." The mercenaries saw the expressions of Chu Tianming and the others and naturally knew what they were thinking. Immediately, they were filled with righteous indignation and stopped their leader from continuing. When the other mercenary leaders saw this, they naturally knew that it was meaningless for them to say anything more. They could only let their own mercenaries be more prepared. If there was any danger later, it would be easier for them to deal with it. When Chu Tianming and the others saw that the mercenaries were silent, they thought that they had guessed correctly. These people had deliberately made this place sound so dangerous for the sake of rewards. Lowly people were indeed lowly people. No matter where they went, they would never forget their greedy nature. They snorted with disdain and led the way to the open space. "You guys follow me. Just protect us. We will deal with the rest ourselves." They could use the strength of this magical beast group to train themselves. If they could save Chu Ke and the others, they might be able to get some benefits from the third elder and Madame Xing. With this thought, they immediately sped up towards the open space. When the leaders of the mercenary groups heard their voices, their expressions turned even colder. "You all heard that? Later, you just have to do your best to protect these young masters. The rest is none of our business." Even if they lost an arm or a leg, it was none of their business. A leader of a high-ranking mercenary group snorted coldly. The other mercenary leaders also had the same thoughts. The mercenaries under them naturally obeyed, and all of them agreed. When Chu Tianming and the others moved, Luo Qingtong and the others also saw them and rushed towards the open space. This is really a case of a skilled person being bold. Luo Qingtong's lips curved slightly. Because the Tianfeng Chu clan's disciples were a bit ahead of them, Luo Qingtong and the others were still in the valley, but they were already in the dense forest. Luo Qingtong and the others could see them, but they couldn't see Luo Qingtong and the others. Luo Qingtong shook her head as she watched them rush towards the open space. From what she could see, the seemingly empty space was, in fact, densely covered with countless invisible threads. 1,000 silkworms. Their strength was indeed not very strong. Compared to other powerful magic beasts, they did not have much of an advantage and did not seem to be very powerful. But their threads were a huge killing weapon that was different from other magic beasts. This was especially true when they gathered in groups. Think about it, if the sky was filled with such threads, invisible and traceless, and even without knowing where they were, they would weave into a dense net and envelop you. Then no matter how many people came, they would all die. After all, a thread was a sharp blade. The threads that filled the sky were more than thousands of sharp blades. Chapter 25:34. Luo Qingtong looked at the disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family who were rushing toward the open space. Chu Xiaofeng saw this and hurried forward. He said to Luo Qingtong, "Little Qi, let's go. They are the disciples of the sixth elder. If we don't hurry, they will take the initiative." Chu Xiaofeng had no use for the 1,000 silkworms. He didn't know why Luo Qingtong wanted them. However, he wanted the spiritual herbs guarded by the 1,000 silkworms. Seeing the disciples of the sixth elder of the Tianfeng Chu family rushing toward the open space, he was very anxious. If possible, he didn't want the spiritual herbs guarded by the 1,000 silkworms to fall into the hands of others. As he spoke, he was about to rush down with the mercenaries behind him. However, Luo Qingtong stopped him. "It's okay. They can't get it." Luo Qingtong's voice was leisurely and her face was indifferent. The temperament of a strategist in the past unconsciously appeared on her body. "Let them explore the 1,000 silkworms first." Luo Qingtong focused her eyes on the open space. She had seen the figures of those people entering the open space. Oh, those 1,000 silkworms were smart. They deliberately left a few openings on the edge of the open space facing the dense forest for the disciples and mercenaries of the Tianfeng Chu family to enter. She didn't know whether this hunting ability was innate or cultivated after killing too many people in the open space. Luo Qingtong smiled faintly and said nothing. When Chu Xiaofeng heard her words, he immediately stopped in his tracks. He trusted Luo Qingtong's words the most. The young man had never made a mistake when making plans for their team. This time should be no exception. Thinking of this, he calmed down. He restrained his temper and stood beside Luo Qingtong. His eyes were closely watching the open space in front of them. His eyes were eager and nervous. He hoped that Luo Shaoqi was right this time. The moment Luo Qingtong's words left her mouth, Chu Yufei, who was originally lowering her head and enduring the embarrassment in her heart, suddenly raised her head and looked at Luo Qingtong with a bit of astonishment and disbelief. They were indeed ambushed in the open. However, she didn't specifically remind him of this when she was telling him about it. Chu Yufei thought that after Luo Qingtong and the others entered the open space and were attacked, she would tell them about it. She would say that she had forgotten about it and then point out a safe way for Luo Qingtong and the others. In this way, although Luo Qingtong and the others suffered some losses in the beginning, and even some casualties, she saved everyone. At that time, everyone in Chu Xiaofeng's team would be indebted to her. Naturally, they would treat her differently. Chu Yufei's plan was very good. She even deliberately concealed the 1,000 silkworms when she talked about them. No one found out that she deliberately omitted this part. She didn't expect that Luo Qingtong didn't get her reminder at all, but seemed to have completely seen through the mystery of the open space. How did she know that the people of the sixth elder's side couldn't pass through? Chu Yufei looked at Luo Qingtong's back and her heart was in a mess. She didn't know how she saw through it. The group of mercenaries had long known about Luo Qingtong's amazing observation skills and had long been used to it. Hearing Luo Qingtong's words, they immediately stopped faster than Chu Xiaofeng. Unknowingly, Luo Qingtong's prestige in this team had long been higher than that of Chu Xiaofeng and the Red Flame Mercenary Corps. She had become the backbone of the team. Even the lightly injured mercenaries that Chu Yufei and Chu Ke had brought with them followed her lead. Chapter 25-35. Ah! A tragic cry instantly came from the open space. The disciples of Tianfeng Chu Elder Lu and the guards behind them, who had just entered the open space unimpeded, seemed to have bumped into invisible blades. In an instant, many of the mercenaries on the periphery were cut by the invisible blades in the air. Some of them had their legs cut off while others had their arms cut off. Some of them were directly cut into several pieces. They did not even have time to call for help and died on the spot. Who? What's going on? Where did these attacks come from? The disciples of the Heavenly Wind Chu clan's sixth elder were still mocking the mercenaries in their hearts for being so cautious. They said there was danger, but where was the danger? They had effortlessly walked into the open space and did not even see the figure of a magical beast. Those magical beasts might have eaten and drunk their fill and were resting. It just so happened that they had rushed to the spiritual herbs they were guarding and killed them directly. Then they could collect those spiritual herbs for their own use. At the same time, they were mocking Chu Ke and her guards in their hearts for being so weak. They had heard that Chu Yufei had 2 high-level and 3 mid-level mercenary corps by her side. They were not weak, but they were so easily defeated by those magical beasts. How useless. Everyone felt disdain in their hearts. They were even more dismissive of the mercenaries' warning that they had been ambushed in this open space. There was no cover around this open space. Where could those magical beasts ambush them? Obviously, this was just an excuse those mercenaries found to cover up their incompetence. But even so, they still raised their guard when they entered this open space. Chu Tianming released his sword aura as he walked and stabbed it deep into the open space to see if those magical beasts were hiding there. After discovering that there were none, he sneered at the mercenaries' words even more. But just as they were feeling smug and disdainful, the attack came silently. Moreover, the murderous aura was aggressive and did not give them any time to breathe. Everyone did not even know where the problem was. There was clearly nothing around them. There wasn't any fluctuation of spiritual qi either. Where did these blade-like attacks come from? Chu Tianming and the others panicked. Just as they were screaming miserably in the clearing, a series of rustling sounds rang out from the dense forest. In an instant, Chu Tianming and the others looked up and were scared out of their wits. It turned out that the creatures crawling out of the dense forest were wriggling magical beasts. These demonic beasts were shrouded in dense black corrosive spirit qi, and their bodies seemed to be covered with vajra spikes. Its huge mouth was filled with teeth, and there was also a pair of large pincers that were opening and closing. Their bodies were covered with white dots, which looked like stripes on their skin at first glance. However, if one were to take a closer look, one would discover that countless threads were shooting out from it. 1,000 silkworms. Even though the demonic beasts weren't the strongest, they were still extremely difficult to deal with. Once they gathered into a group, even a group of magical beasts that were far more powerful than them would have to avoid them. Chapter 25-36. No one knew where they came from. They had just walked through the dense forest and there was nothing hiding there. But at this moment, the swarm of 1,000 silkworms that had appeared all around them made them extremely terrified. When they thought about how these things might have been hiding above or below their feet when they passed through the dense forest, their legs turned to jelly. These 1,000 silkworms were extremely terrifying. They did not attack in such a situation, but waited for them to enter the open space before they started to surround them. His scheming was not inferior to humans at all. Among them there must be some that have gained sentience. They were king worms. Indeed, just as they thought about it, they saw a huge golden king worm wriggling towards them under the protection of a group of 1,000 silkworms that were much larger than ordinary 1,000 silkworms. Its gaze was fixed on the few disciples of the Tianfeng Chu clan, and its saliva kept flowing out of its mouth. These people were very powerful and their bodies contained a vast amount of spirit energy. In the eyes of the 1,000 silkworm king, they were the best nourishing food that could help it evolve. It was no wonder that these disciples of the Tianfeng Chu clan grew up in the Tianfeng Chu clan. They were given the best resources in terms of food, clothing, housing, and transportation. Even his flesh and blood had been nurtured and tempered by countless spiritual medicines and spiritual items. In the eyes of the 1,000 silkworm king, they were walking spiritual herbs in human form. It was upset that it let 2 of Chu Yufei escape in the morning and now 4 more came. The 1,000 silkworm king was overjoyed. If it had not ordered the 1,000 silkworms to stop, Chu Tianming and the rest would not have been able to walk to the center of the open space unscathed. Humans wanted to hunt them, but they did not know that they wanted to hunt them too. The 1,000 silkworm king looked at Chu Tianming and the rest greedily, but it did not look at the rest of the mercenaries. Instead, the other 1,000 silkworms were eyeing them covetously. This was because Chu Tianming and the rest with the best potential were the prey of the king. However, although the rest of them lacked spirit energy and their flesh and blood were not as delicious as Chu Tianming and the rest, they were still meat no matter how small a mosquito's leg was. They didn't mind at all. A group of 1,000 silkworms surged out of the dense forest. The countless spots on their bodies spurted out thousands of threads, reinforcing the net they had already set up in the open space. At that moment, Chu Tianming and the others finally knew what they had just encountered. It turned out to be the threads spat out by these magical beasts. After knowing the reason, they hurriedly used their swords and sabers to cut the threads around them. They wanted to cut off the threads that were entangled in the open space. They wanted to cut a bloody path out. However, as soon as they did so, they realized that they could only barely cut a single thread with their swords. Even if those mercenary group leaders who were at or above the 6th level of the human martial realm, they would only be able to split a dozen of them. Compared to the reinforcing threads that the 1,000 silkworms spat out, it was not even worth mentioning. 1,000 silkworms, 1,000 silkworms. Every time they spat out silk, they could spit out at least 1,000 strands. Chapter 25-37. However, at this moment, the 1,000 silkworms had already formed their webs and were waiting for their prey. Chu Tianming and the rest were like mosquitoes that had fallen into a spider's web. They struggled to break free but were unable to do so. Speaking of which, they were unlucky. Previously, Chuker and the rest were attacked as soon as they entered the open space. In the end they were lucky enough to escape. The Thousand Silkworm Kingworm was very depressed. This time, it deliberately let Chu Tianming and the rest enter before attacking. Therefore Chu Tianming and the rest were like trapped in a spider's web. They could not escape at all. Layers upon layers of silk had sealed off their escape routes from all directions. The thousand silkworms also wriggled and spread out under the kingworm's command. They surrounded all four directions of the open space, ensuring that even if they were lucky enough to escape from the open space, they would not be able to run away. The surroundings of the dense forest were spat into huge cocoons, sealing off all escape routes for Chu Tianming and the rest. Under the attack of the thousand silkworms, they were constantly compressed and gathered. In the end they were all trapped in the open space. When the thousand silkworms approached, their fate would be 10,000 times worse than Chuker and the rest. Everyone would be devoured by the thousand silkworms and turned into fertilizer in their stomachs to nourish their bodies and spiritual energy. At the thought of this, the group of mercenaries fell into despair. F***CKU. Chu Tianming. We told you that there was danger in here, but you refused to listen to us. Look at you now. All of us will be buried with you. A high-ranking mercenary group leader's eyes were red as he punched Chu Tianming. The arrogant Chu Tianming, who had looked at them with disdain, fell flat on his face. The other disciples of the Heavenly Wind Chu clan were all shocked when they saw this. Before they could react, they were beaten up by the other mercenaries. Stop. Chu Tianming's teeth were about to fall out. As their guards, these mercenaries were naturally stronger than them. Previously, because of the employment agreement, they could not attack them and could only listen to their orders. But at this moment, because they felt that they were dead for sure, they didn't have anything to worry about. Let's beat them up first. Anyway, as long as they didn't die, they didn't have to worry about being punished by the contract. Everyone wanted to kill Chu Tianming and the others. Therefore, Chu Tianming's shout did not receive any response at all. In fact, the way they beat them up became even more ferocious and ruthless. If it weren't for their stubbornness, how could they possibly be trapped in this land of death? He clearly knew that Chuker and the others had died in this dense forest. These people actually thought highly of themselves and thought that Chuker and Chu Yufei's mercenaries were useless. This time all of them were going to die here. The group of people beat up Chu Tianming and the others in despair. The latter and the others were beaten until they cried out in pain, but they couldn't fight back. Above the call, Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up when she saw the kingworm. There really was a kingworm among the thousand silkworms. She was just thinking about how to lure all the thousand silkworms out to see if the kingworm was there. Chapter 2538. Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up when she saw the thousand silkworms swarming out of the forest. These demonic beasts were all treasures. With them she would be able to create better meridians for Xianxia. This way the man would not have to suffer the pain of his meridians breaking when he attacked again. Especially the thousand silkworm king. The insect treasure in its body had the ability to regenerate indefinitely. After obtaining it, Yi Qianren would be able to deal with any ordinary attacks. Luo Qingtong was indescribably happy when she thought about how Yi Qianxian would be able to get rid of the situation where his meridians would explode and his blood would flow like a river. However, even if the thousand silkworm king's meridians could regenerate indefinitely, there was a time limit. They would not be able to regenerate immediately even if they were broken. Hence, the silk threads in these thousand silkworm king's meridians could not be left out. Luo Qingtong looked at these thousand silkworms as if she was looking at a huge treasure. Beside her, Gu Yifeng and the rest walked over. When they saw the scene below, they immediately asked Luo Qingtong, "Little Seven, can we save old Qin and the rest?" They were referring to the mercenaries who followed Chu Tianming and the rest. Among them, there were a few high-level mercenary groups that Gu Yifeng and the rest knew. It would be fine if they did not meet them. Now that they saw them trapped in the thousand silkworms' net trap, they could not bear to see them die. The mercenaries in Tianfeng Mercenary City were quite united against outsiders. Their own internal affairs were their own internal affairs. There was competition, but they could not bear to watch the other party die. However, Gu Yifeng and the rest did not want to make things difficult for Luo Qingtong. Hence they asked if she could save them and if there was a way. If there was no way, then there was nothing they could do. After all, it would be difficult for them to deal with so many thousand silkworms, especially when the other party's net trap was set. If they tried to save the mercenaries by force, they might lose themselves. Thinking of this, Gu Yifeng and the rest looked at Luo Qingtong. Even Chu Xiaofeng looked at Luo Qingtong. Those were the disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family. Although they were from the 6th elder's side and not the 8th elder's side, they were still from the Tianfeng Chu family. It would be best if they could be saved. Of course he would not force Luo Qingtong. Of course. After all, the 1,000 silkworms were terrifying and dangerous. He wasn't stupid enough to disregard his own life for others. Yes. Luo Qingtong's words. Speaking of which, 6th elders people could be considered to have done her a great favor. Without them, Luo Qingtong would have to spend a lot of effort to lure the 1,000 silkworms and 1,000 silkworm kingworms out. Now the 1,000 silkworms king were all lured. Luo Qingtong's blood eyes had already found a way to deal with the 1,000 silkworms when she scanned the dense forest and the bodies of the 1,000 silkworms. Seeing that the people from the Tianfeng Chu family had lured the 1,000 silkworms and 1,000 silkworm kingworms out for her, she decided to save them. After all, if it were not for them, Chu Xiaofeng's team would have suffered some casualties. Luo Qingtong hated it when the people around her got into trouble. Luo Qingtong agreed without hesitation. Gu Yifeng and the rest were instantly overjoyed. Chu Xiaofeng also thanked Luo Qingtong. Chapter 2539. One of them bit his lips. No one knew what he was thinking. Another person gritted his teeth and shouted at Luo Qingtong with a sullen face, "How shameless! These 1,000 silkworms are so powerful. Even the 6th elders people can't deal with them. How many people do you have here? How dare you boast that you can save people? You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Chu Xiaofeng, you also let her do whatever she wants. Don't tell me you're gay and like her?" Chu Ke's eyes were burning. She saw the intimacy between Xianxia and Luo Qingtong just now. She didn't know why, but there was a burst of anger in her heart. She didn't know what was going on. The man with the white jade mask had been covering his face. She didn't know what he looked like at all, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. The other party seemed to have a natural bearing and temperament that made people unable to take their eyes off him. Chu Ke was sure that the other party was definitely not an ordinary person. Not only that, but he was also good-looking. But at this moment, not only did the other party ignore them, but he was also so close to Luo Xiaoqi. Chu Ke saw it clearly just now. If Yi Qianren hadn't retreated quickly, perhaps their lips would have touched. Bastard, this B****. She caused her to be so miserable, and she even dared to steal the man she liked. She didn't even look at her poor appearance, and she was a man. How could she steal him from her? Chu Ke's sleeves were almost torn by her. Now that he saw Chu Xiaofeng and the rest listening to Luo Qingtong's words, he could not hold it in anymore. Luo Qingtong raised her eyebrows and looked at Chu Ke, who was looking at her with fire in her eyes. Suddenly, she rolled her eyes and pulled Yi Qianxian over. "That's right, I'm gay. So what? You probably don't know how happy I am to have girls in my arms. I'm not like you. As the 3rd miss of the Tianfeng Chu family, no one wants you." Luo Qingtong had already seen that Chu Ke and Chu Yufei had been staring at Yi Qianxian. Really, this stinky man, even with a mask on his face, couldn't stop others from throwing themselves at him. Luo Qingtong was unhappy. If she was unhappy, Chu Ke and the others wouldn't be happy. If not for the fact that there were people from the Heavenly Wind Chu clan guarding outside, Luo Qingtong did not want to cause any trouble and cause Yi Qianren and the others to expose their identities. She would have attacked Chu Ke. Was her man so easy to covet? She would slowly be envious, jealous, and hateful. "You're shameless." Chu Ke was so angry that her face turned green and red. How could this Luo Xiaoqi say such shameless words? Chu Ke wasn't afraid that Luo Qingtong would attack her. There were so many people here, and the Tianfeng Chu family's people were guarding outside. Once they knew that she was hurt by AB** teeth like Luo Xiaoqi, they definitely wouldn't let it go. By then the entire mercenary city would be in trouble. But who would have thought that Luo Qingtong would admit to her words and even pull the white jade masked man over to prove it? And the other party didn't even refute. Could it be that he was really gay? Chu Ke was angry, anxious, and embarrassed. If Chu Yufei hadn't stopped her, she would have pounced on Luo Qingtong. Chapter 2540. This was because Chu Xiaofeng had already blocked in front of Luo Qingtong. Chu Xiaofeng wouldn't care if she was the young lady of the Tianfeng Chu family. He would definitely make a move on her and teach her a lesson. Chu Ke's anger had reached its peak. In the end, her eyes rolled back and she fainted. Tisk, she's so weak. The young ladies of the Tianfeng Chu family are really delicate. Luo Qingtong didn't expect that Chuka would faint from anger after she said a few words and didn't even get serious. Her ability to resist attacks was on a completely different level from Luo Xining and Feng Wan. Luo Qingtong raised her hand and gently rubbed her chin. Chuka should be glad that she had met Luo Qingtong, and not Luo Qingtong. Otherwise, with her psychological quality, she would have been played to death several times in the True Spill continent. Feng Wan and the others were better. Speaking of which, Feng Wan, that woman. If the crack in the southern region was caused by her and the green smoke in her body, she should be in the outer region right now, right? She didn't know how she was doing now. She hoped that she wasn't doing too badly. Otherwise she couldn't help but be disappointed. After all, the higher the other party climbed, the more miserable they would be when they fell. Wasn't that right? She had sent troops to 2 dynasties and almost killed her grandfather and grandmother as well as everyone in the Luo family. Feng Wan, I'm a very vengeful person. I'll remember each and every one of these things for you. When you and I meet again, I will settle everything with you one by one with interest included. You'd better be able to hold on a little longer. Otherwise this matter will be meaningless. Right. Luo Qingtong's lips revealed a bloody smile. The coldness in her eyes completely froze people's hearts. Chu Yufei originally wanted to take the opportunity to cry after Chuka fainted and blame Luo Qingtong to distract her. But before she could speak, she looked up and met Luo Qingtong's eyes. She instantly shuddered. She didn't know why, but the words at the tip of her tongue couldn't come out. Even the pretentious tears that were about to gush out of her eyes were suddenly frightened back. What kind of eyes were those? It was as if all things were going to die. It was bloody and boundless. One's soul seemed to be frozen just by looking at it. How could this Luo Xiaoqi have such a terrifying eyes? Chu Yufei's body stiffened and she couldn't say a word. On the other hand, Luo Qingtong quickly reined in her emotions after her murderous aura was revealed. She looked at Chu Yufei with a smile and said, Miss Yufei and Miss Ku'er are really sisters. Since Miss Ku'er has fainted, Miss Yufei doesn't have to participate in the battle later. Otherwise, if the two of you get hurt, we mercenaries can't afford it. Luo Qingtong originally didn't intend to bring Chu Ku'er and Chu Yufei down. These two people were big trouble. It would be good if they didn't drag her down. She was most afraid that they would be more of a hindrance, but she couldn't kill them. At this moment, Chu Ku'er's fainting had helped her. Luo Qingtong directly asked Chu Yufei to stay, so that the other party couldn't find a reason to follow her. Didn't she want to be sisters with Chu Ku'er? Then she should stay here and take care of her. Chapter 2541. Luo Qingtong clearly saw that Chu Yufei wanted to fall on Yi Qianren's body, but the latter walked away, so she did not get what she wanted. She would not give Chu Yufei a chance to follow her and throw herself at Yi Qianxian. After giving these instructions, Luo Qingtong left with Chu Xiaofeng and the others. Looking at her back, Chu Yufei bit her lips hard, and her eyes were full of unwillingness. She and Chu Ku'er had really underestimated Luo Xiaoqi before. She didn't expect that she was the soul of Mercenary City. A weak young man in the fierce and ruthless Mercenary City where life and death were played, actually made a name for himself. Not only that, but she was also able to make so many mercenaries submit to her willingly. Even Chu Xiaofeng was convinced by him. This was not something an ordinary person could do. Perhaps no one noticed that Luo Qingtong was the leader of Chu Xiaofeng's team at this moment. Even if the young man tried to hide his sharpness, the kingly momentum and convincing demeanor he showed from time to time could always make people listen to him unconsciously. Even Bei Qing and Feng Yu, who were absolutely loyal to Yi Qianxian, followed his orders subconsciously. By the time they reacted, they had already followed Luo Qingtong and the others down nearly 100 meters. Master. They looked at Yi Qianxian beside them and their scalps tingled. They didn't know why they inexplicably listened to Luo Qingtong's words. It was really strange. Normally, even in Tiandu might not be able to order them around. Not to mention a young man like Luo Xiaoqi. This young man was really strange. Only Yi Qianxian looked at Luo Qingtong more and more gloomy and deep. Don't worry, after tonight we will know the answer. Follow closely. Ignoring the looks of Bei Qing and Feng Yu, Yi Qianxian's face was indifferent, and his thin lips slightly opened. Don't let a single 1,000 silkworm go. These silkworms were all the foundation for him to protect Luo Qingtong in the future. He would never allow any mistakes. Yes. Bei Qing and Feng Yu were relieved when they saw that their master didn't seem to blame them. They continued to follow Luo Qingtong and the others down the canal. They knew that Yi Qianxian's "follow closely" referred to Luo Qingtong. This young man was really favored by their master. But when they left, what would master do? Would he take him with him or something else? If he brought her along, how was he going to explain himself if he met the demonic doctor in the future? And what if his master was really gay? Oh my god. I reckon the entire sky is about to collapse. Wind Feather hugged his head full of paste, and as he moved his body he kept scrolling through the screen in his mind. He always felt that he had spied on a big secret. What should he do? And if his master really found out that Luo Xiaoqi was his true love, what would the evil doctor do? Would she, in a fit of anger, take her sword and kill her way to Tiandu, just to suppress her master, this heartless man? Thinking of such a scene, he had a toothache. Feng Yu was stupefied. No one knew that he was crazily complaining in his heart, and he was very worried about his master. He had always been mature and prudent. If it were Bei Qing, he would have already shouted. While he was thinking, Yi Qianxian's figure flashed and suddenly appeared beside Luo Qingtong. Chapter 2542. Yi Qianxian raised his hand and waved his sleeves, taking Luo Qingtong into his arms. Luo Qingtong and the others had already entered the dense forest. Because they already knew that all the 1,000 filaments worms had been lured out by the 6th Elder's people. Because the dense forest was the territory of the 1,000 filaments worms, there would be no danger in the dense forest at all if they were not here. The group of people suddenly rushed straight in the direction of the open space. Luo Qingtong was taken into Yi Qianxian's arms at this time. She was stunned for a moment, feeling a little incredulous. Didn't this man not like others to get close to him? Even with her identity as Luo Xiaoqi, he could only do it so as not to hurt her. He had never let her get close to him. Not to mention holding her in his arms at this moment. Only Luo Qingtong had done such an action when she was still in her original identity. At this moment, being held in Yi Qianxian's arms, Luo Qingtong exerted great self-control to not subconsciously put her hands around his thin waist. The man's aura was so familiar and his arms were so safe, hard and soft. The hard part was his muscles and the soft part was the way he used to treat her like a pearl and a treasure. Luo Qingtong had always been calm and self-controlled, but the moment she entered Yi Qianxian's arms, she had an impulse to hug him back and rely on him. Everything about this man had been engraved in her heart. Luo Qingtong had no doubt that if she had bumped into Yi Qianxian's arms when he came to check her identity in the middle of the night, she would have definitely recognized him. Even if he had covered his face and changed all the decorations and aura she was familiar with. Luo Qingtong's hand quietly stroked Yi Qianxian's left ring finger. It used to be the matching ring of the 9 Phoenix ring and the Shifang dragon ring. But this time it was empty. Her previous guess was right. Yi Qianxian had indeed encountered something, so the Shifang dragon ring was taken off. And her 9 Phoenix ring had lost its effect because of this and could be taken off. But she didn't expect that he was hiding his identity. However, no matter how familiar and warm this embrace was, Luo Qingtong couldn't indulge in it. She couldn't let Yi Qianxian see her identity now. At least she couldn't before leaving this abandoned continent. Brother, it's okay. Please put me down. Luo Qingtong struggled to escape from Yi Qianxian's arms. However, Yi Qianren's eyes were cold as she stared at her. Seeing her movements, he immediately raised Luo Qingtong's arms. Very much. Those 1,000 silkworms are very strong. You'd better stay by my side obediently. Yi Qianren's voice was cold. Taking someone's money, isn't it? Hearing Yi Qianxian's words, Luo Qingtong thought about it and agreed. No wonder this man took the initiative to approach her. It turned out that the money attack, the spiritual grass attack of these days had taken effect. Sure enough, one could do whatever one wanted with money. It was the same for spiritual grass. Luo Qingtong thought about it and immediately felt relieved. She was wondering why this man's actions were so strange. So it was like this. Fortunately, she had been stuffing him with spiritual herbs for the past few days and it was indeed effective. Chapter 2543. Luo Qingtong was afraid that Yi Qianxian would approach her inexplicably. This man's intuition was very sensitive. He had doubted her identity several times, causing her to not dare to approach him. Now that she knew that he was fulfilling his duty as a protector for the sake of the spiritual herbs, she immediately felt relieved. She finally had a reason to approach him openly. She was happy. Luo Qingtong's eyes were smiling. Yi Qianren looked at her crescent-shaped eyes. Her gaze swept past her and the light in her eyes became even more deep and serene. He did not say anything. He just raised his hand to protect Luo Qingtong. He was not lying when he said that he would protect Luo Qingtong. These 1,000 silkworms had average strength, but they were extremely difficult to deal with. In particular, Luo Qingtong and the others needed their silk threads, so they had to keep their corpses intact as much as possible. In this way, Yi Qianxian and the others could not use many of their strength and skills. Otherwise, they could easily damage their bodies, because they were too strong. Yi Qianxian in particular was not prepared to take action. He was only prepared to protect Luo Qingtong. The latter had no intention of participating in the battle at all. With her current strength, if she participated in the battle, she would not be a match for these 1,000 silkworms unless she used her blood eye and life and death sword. She had better not join in the fun. She would continue to be a weak young man. Moreover, she really missed Yi Qianxian's embrace. Based on this man's arrogant and cold temperament, after today he would definitely not act like this again. Luo Qingtong felt that she really could not miss out on this opportunity. She had better enjoy it. With this thought in mind, Luo Qingtong immediately leaned in Yi Qianxian's arms and let him lead her to the open space. Swoosh! Luo Qingtong and the others approached the open space silently. At the same time, the 1,000 silkworms also rushed over to Chu Tianming and the others while drooling. The latter and the others were completely trapped in the center of the open space. With the reinforcement of the 1,000 silkworms, traces of the invisible net in the open space were all revealed. It was a sea of threads. Other than the small area where they were standing, there was no other place for them to step on at a glance. The 1,000 silkworms wriggled quickly and approached Chu Tianming and the others. Everyone's faces turned pale when they saw the huge mouth and pincers. There were even some people who burst into tears. The mercenaries weren't afraid of death, but if they were swallowed like this and turned into fertilizer for the 1,000 silkworms, or even excreted as feces, they found it hard to accept. There wasn't even a decent way to die. Could it be that they were going to die here today? Everyone felt despair in their hearts. At this time, Luo Qingtong and the others had already closed in on the open space. If they rushed out again, they would reveal themselves in the dense forest. Little 7? Chu Xiaofeng and the others looked at Luo Qingtong, not knowing how she was going to deal with these 1,000 silkworms. Especially their threads, they were too difficult to deal with. Not to mention that they had already gathered into a net. If Chu Xiaofeng and the others were careless, not to mention saving Chu Tianming and the others, they might even lose their lives. Everyone looked at Luo Qingtong. Chapter 2544. Do you see those things? Luo Qingtong raised her hand and pointed to the place where the 1,000 silkworms had just been. There was something shiny there. It looked like the mucus that flowed down from the 1,000 silkworms. Rub all of those things on your weapons, Luo Qingtong said. Then she raised her hand and pointed to several big trees not far away. Peel off the bark of those big trees and take out the white mucus inside. When you move, pour it on those 1,000 silkworms. Everyone heard her order and immediately responded in unison. Even Chu Xiaofeng couldn't help but agree with the group of mercenaries. By the time he realized that he was not Luo Qingtong's subordinate, the words had already left his mouth. He touched his nose and didn't particularly resist. He just felt a little strange. Luo Xiaoqi seemed to have an aura that made it easy for people to obey her orders. He had never seen this kind of aura even on the patriarch. Was the other party really just a weak youth? He glanced at Luo Qingtong. He saw her snuggling comfortably in Yi Qianren's arms, as if she was on a leisurely trip. Her eyes were slightly narrowed and in an instant, the corner of his lips twitched violently. He suppressed the questions that surged out from the bottom of his heart. Looking at the other party's appearance, he should be a weak youth. What kind of strong person would be hugged by another person like her and enjoy the other party's protection? Luo Qingtong didn't know Chu Xiaofeng's thoughts at all. Of course, even if she knew, she wouldn't care. What's wrong with her relying on her man? Did she eat your rice? He was willing. Luo Qingtong had always done things her own way. No one could force her to do things she didn't want to do. But if she wanted to do something, no one could stop her. As for the rumors that might spread about her short-sleeved clothes, Luo Qingtong indicated that when she and Yi Qianren were at True Spill Continent, it wasn't as if they hadn't talked about it before. There was no pressure at all to be involved in a scandal with her man, okay? Therefore she couldn't be bothered to care about the opinions of Chu Xiaofeng and the others. Of course, other than Chu Xiaofeng, the others quickly rushed toward those two places after answering. Some of them were responsible for collecting the mucus left on the ground by the worms. The other group of people were quietly scraping tree bark and collecting resin. They didn't notice Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian at all. As for the latter, after Luo Qingtong snuggled into his embrace, his expression became increasingly tense. The light in his eyes became increasingly dark and indescribable. His hands, which were hidden under his sleeves, loosened and tightened. In the end he didn't do anything. While Luo Qingtong and the others were preparing, the situation in the open space was getting more and more tense. The 1,000 silkworms had already broken through to the mercenaries who had been compressed to the center of the open space. The latter and the others could no longer care about beating up Chu Tianming and the others. They could only watch as the behemoths got closer and closer. Their hearts were filled with despair and bitterness. Motherf *, if anyone can save us today, I'll do anything for them. The leader of a high-ranking mercenary group said with grief and indignation. However, when everyone heard his words, they only smiled bitterly. How could anyone come to save them in such a place? Even if someone knew that they were here, it was impossible to save them from the encirclement of the 1,000 silkworms. Not to mention that it was basically impossible for anyone to know that they were surrounded here. Chapter 2545. Just as everyone was waiting for death in despair, a voice suddenly rang out. Suddenly, a burst of hearty laughter came from not far in front of them. Haha, Olchen, you said it yourself. You'll work like a horse for us in the future. Gu Yifeng's expression instantly turned serious when he heard the hearty laughter. Then he shouted coldly, "Do it." Boom. Following Gu Yifeng's shout, the mercenaries who were trapped in the open space suddenly discovered that in front of them, there was an explosion of dazzling blade light and sword chi light. At the same time, the clanging of countless weapons sounded in the air. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. The mercenaries were shocked to find that the silk threads that they could not cut no matter how hard they tried were actually cut by Gu Yifeng and the rest's weapons. Good, Gu Yifeng, I didn't expect you to make it here. Don't say that I, Old Chin, will work like a horse for you. I'll even be a pig for you. The mercenaries were pleasantly surprised when they saw this scene. Especially the senior mercenary leader called Old Chin by Gu Yifeng, who was laughing heartily at this moment. They did not expect to be saved. Gu Yifeng and the rest came at the right time. The mercenaries who followed Chu Tianming and the rest were extremely excited. They immediately brandished their weapons and slashed at the silk threads. However, what shocked them was that Gu Yifeng and the rest cut the silk threads like they were tofu. Why were they so stiff and unable to cut them? Everyone was at a complete loss. They originally thought that these silk threads had a time limit and that after a period of solidification, they would be cut by Gu Yifeng and the rest. Now it seemed that this was not the case. Everyone was astonished. Gu Yifeng and the rest laughed heartily and threw the mucus of the 1,000 silkworms that they had collected over to them. Use this. Gu Yifeng looked at the ferocious 1,000 silkworms that were charging at them. He waved his hand and said, "Splash." This was Luo Qingtong's order. After cutting the threads, he immediately splashed the 1,000 filarial worms with the resin. Gu Yifeng and the others didn't know what the resin was for. However, they would definitely listen to Luo Qingtong. Because Luo Qingtong had told them to wipe the mucus on their weapons to tell them that she was right. If it weren't for the mucus, they wouldn't have been able to cut those threads so easily. One had to know that they had seen Chu Tianming and the others fight against the 1,000 silkworms threads. Naturally, he knew how tough and difficult it was to deal with these threads. Bang bang bang. Buckets after buckets of resin were splashed onto the 1,000 silkworms. The latter was waving its huge pincers ferociously as it madly closed in on them. Suddenly it stopped and became flustered. The kingworm was surrounded by a group of 1,000 silkworms. When it smelled the scent of the resin, it immediately became anxious. It let out a sharp cry, then turned around and rushed towards the direction of the dense forest. Behind it, the group of 1,000 silkworms also scattered and fled. However, it was too late. The resin had all landed on them. They were drenched and none of them were spared. Chapter 2546. The situation on the field changed dramatically. The 1,000 silkworms that had been splashed with resin were firmly stuck to the silk threads that they had densely covered in the open space. The silk threads that were originally unaffected by them seemed to have lost their connection to them and stuck to them, preventing them from leaving. They couldn't break free no matter how hard they tried. It turned out that the resin blocked the mucus and aura on their bodies so that they were no longer unaffected by the silk threads. Now they were no different from Gui Feng and the others. They were also obstructed and entangled by the silk threads. However, Gui Feng and the others had weapons that could cut these silk threads. It wasn't as convenient for them to clean up the silk threads as it was for Gui Feng and the others. How would these 1,000 silkworms feel now that they had become their prey? The 1,000 silkworms that had been baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at Gui Feng and the others, desperately spitting out threads in an attempt to bind them, were in an even more miserable state. After being splashed with resin, they became even more miserable. In an instant, the silk threads that had been spitting at Gui Feng and the others all wrapped around them, turning them into large cocoons. They couldn't move at all. The group of 1,000 silkworms who had been aggressive just a moment ago had all become fish in the net. This was something no one had expected. After splashing the resin, Gui Feng and the others were ready to fight to prevent these 1,000 silkworms from going berserk. However, no one had expected that the resin that Luo Qingtong asked them to collect would make the 1,000 silkworms lose their immunity to the silk threads. Instead, they were wrapped up in the silk threads. Even Bei Qing and Feng Yu, who were ready to stop the 1,000 silkworms from escaping, widened their eyes in an instant. Damn, this Luo Xiaoqi was really something. They didn't expect that the resin she asked them to collect would have such an effect. This made it very convenient for them to kill these 1,000 silkworms. Especially the king worm. They didn't have to worry about exposing their strength too much. Bei Qing and Feng Yu were pleasantly surprised. They looked at the struggling insect king wrapped in the silk thread. They raised their hands and made a gesture. In an instant, a group of people gathered around them and attacked the insect king. The poor king beetle was still desperately using its pincers to cut off the silk threads on its body. But because the resin on its body was too sticky, it couldn't be moved at all. Even if one of the threads was broken, the remaining threads were still hanging on its body, hindering its movements. Especially with the presence of the resin, it couldn't spit out silk threads to weave a net to deal with Bei Qing, Feng Yu and the others. It could only let them beat it up. One had to know that the 1,000 silkworms' greatest weapon and reliance were their threads. At this moment, this terrifying killing machine was completely destroyed by Luo Qingtong's people's splashing of the resin. Not only that, but it also became a sharp weapon against them, preventing them from escaping immediately. Under the circumstances, the 100,000 silkworms were like tigers that had their teeth pulled out. They were completely trapped in the open space. Gui Feng and the others could easily split them up and then use their strength to slowly grind them to death. In this way, their lives were greatly guaranteed. Chapter 2547. Seeing this scene, Chu Tianming's mercenary guards, who had been forced into a desperate situation by the 1,000 silkworms, were all dumbfounded. They had just smeared the mucus that Gui Feng and the others had thrown at them on their weapons and were about to start a massacre to help Gui Feng and the others. But before they could do anything, they realized that the battle was almost over. The 1,000 silkworms were all rooted to the spot. Under such circumstances, was there any suspense to the battle? Oh my God! If they hadn't seen with their own eyes how ferocious these magical beasts were, they would have been torn apart and eaten. Everyone would have thought that these 1,000 silkworms were not that scary at all. What the F***ck? How did Gui Feng and the others do it? Smack! Old Chen fiercely slapped his thigh. This is all thanks to little 7th young master. Damn it, I don't know what kind of luck Gui Feng and the others have to meet someone like little 7th young master. Look at them, they didn't suffer much in this abandoned continent. Everyone looked gloomily at Gui Feng and the others, only to see that they were full of energy and their movements were extremely skillful and well coordinated. Even Chu Xiaofeng was working closely with them. His grandmother was a runner. Why hadn't they met someone like little 7th young master? If they could go back in time when little 7th young master was bullied by the Black Iron Mercenary Corps, they would have stood up for her regardless of their own safety. She was a god of fortune, a life-saving Buddha. The group quickly joined Gui Feng and the others in the battle. Because of their participation, the screams of the 1,000 silkworms under attack became even more mournful. Just then Yi Qianxian's voice suddenly rang in Luo Qingtong's ears. How do you know that the resin can make these threads wrap around their bodies? Yi Qianxian looked at Luo Qingtong with an unusually deep gaze. He didn't ask about the mucus. After all, it was obvious. Those 1,000 silkworms must have something on them that could ignore these threads. Otherwise, even they would be entangled by these threads. Therefore, Luo Qingtong had Gui Feng and the others smear the mucus on their weapons to attack, which was naturally twice the result with half the effort. But how did she know about the resin? Yi Qianxian's expression was dark, but Luo Qingtong had already thought of an excuse. Do you see any special features on these trees? She raised her hand and pointed at the trees she had pointed out earlier. There are no traces of the 1,000 silkworms on their trees. In addition, although the tenacity of these threads is top-notch, these trees may not be able to withstand the brute force of these mercenaries if they set up a trap here. Under the tug, the tree will break and the threads will become soft. Then it won't be able to weave a net. As for those threads, they are wrapped around the tree trunks. Sure enough, as Luo Qingtong pointed, Yi Qianxian could easily see that the silk threads spat out by the 1,000 silkworms were all wrapped around the trees and went deep into the trunks. Round after round of strangling. So, I guess that these 1,000 silkworms are afraid of these trees, but there is something on them that can strengthen their ability to bind the threads. What's more, these things can even make these threads wrap around their bodies. Luo Qingtong's explanation was reasonable, but Yi Qianxian's gaze deepened. Because Luo Qingtong's words could only explain the abnormality of these trees. But the resin inside was useful and not something else. How did she know? Yi Qianxian's gaze deeply looked into Luo Qingtong's eyes. Chapter 2548. Bang! The sound of an attack suddenly came from the depths of the open space. All the mercenaries who were attacking the 1,000 silkworms in the open space were stunned. What was going on? They were all attacking the 1,000 silkworms in the open space. Who was the one who launched the attack in the depths of the open space? To enter the depths of the open space, one had to pass through the open space. The spiritual herbs that the 1,000 silkworms were guarding were inside. Everyone looked at each other. At this moment, the voice of a mercenary beside Old Chen suddenly sounded. It's Chu Tianming and the rest. Damn it! These ungrateful bastards sneaked into the depths of the open space while we were attacking the 1,000 silkworms to steal the spiritual herbs. The mercenary's voice was filled with righteous indignation and a deep sense of shame. Chu Tianming and the rest were the people they had chosen to follow. At this moment, these people first led them into the 1,000 silkworms trap. Now they sneaked into the depths of the open space while they were attacking the 1,000 silkworms to steal the spiritual herbs from Gui Feng and the rest. How despicable! How shameless! After everyone heard his voice, they lifted their heads and looked around. They immediately realized that Chu Tianming and the others were indeed nowhere to be seen. Because Chu Tianming and the rest were beaten black and blue by Old Chen and the rest and were lying on the ground, no one noticed when they disappeared and when they entered the depths of the open space. These bastards! Old Chen and the rest were furious. Chu Tianming and the rest were a disgrace to them. Chu Xiaofeng's face was also ashen. To think that he had asked the young man to save them in front of Luo Xiaoqi. In the blink of an eye, Chu Tianming and the rest had done such a shameless thing. If he had known, he would have let them die at the hands of the 1,000 silkworms. Damn it! Everyone was infuriated, but they couldn't leave. Perhaps they had sensed the battle fluctuations coming from the depths of the open space. The 1,000 silkworms suddenly went berserk and prevented Gu Yifeng and the rest from leaving. At this moment, Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian also sensed the attack in the depths of the open space. Cough, brother, shall we go and take a look? For some reason, Luo Qingtong felt goosebumps when Yi Qianxian looked at her. She felt that the man's gaze was full of meaning. However, no matter how hard she thought about it, she couldn't find any flaws in her body. It was also strange. This man had been acting weird since just now. She didn't know what was going on. Luo Qingtong thought so and inexplicably felt that something was wrong. This sense of foreboding originated from her extremely sharp intuition. But at this moment, before she could carefully sort out what was wrong with Yi Qianxian, she heard a commotion in the depths of the clearing. In an instant, Luo Qingtong's eyes swept over and discovered that it was Chu Tianming and the others. Eyeing her spoils of war? She had promised those spiritual herbs to Chu Xiaofeng and the others. Seeing that Chu Xiaofeng and the others were entangled by the 1,000 silkworms and were unable to leave, Luo Qingtong immediately said to the man beside her. The latter didn't say anything. With a wave of his sleeve, he brought her to the depths of the empty space. At this moment in the depths of the open space,